Hello everyone, this is part 8 of What If Naruto Was Neglected and Was Trained by Shisui, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Let me ask you something, Narumi. Naruto's voice was emotionless as he spoke, letting his hair blow in the wind as his words glided out into the freezing open air. The sun was just beginning to rise on Yukigaku, letting its bright rays shine down on both Naruto and Narumi. They stood a good 100 feet from another, letting their feet sink slightly into the soft snow beneath them. After Narumi had confronted Naruto, they had both agreed that fighting indoors would only cause more panic to ensue. The only reason Naruto had agreed was to make sure Kurenai wouldn't be aware of their fight. So after a quick shunshin, they were both outside, basking in the sun's rays. They stood in silence for a few minutes, Naruto's question going unanswered as Narumi felt her fists clench. She scowled deeply, finally raising her head to look at her brother who was staring at her intently. Looking into his mirrored blue, she felt herself grow angrier. He should be scared, he should be shaking in place at facing such a strong foe. Then why did he look so calm? Go on then, ask. Her voice betrayed the emotion she was trying to fight back. Her tone was laced with pure annoyance as she watched her brother look away from her, breaking eye contact. He took in a deep breath, trying to calm down his own growing frustration. The next words came out of his mouth subconsciously, asking the question he has been dying to know since the mission in Tizuna. Why have you been acting like this for the past few weeks? Before we met each other in Tizuna, you almost seemed like you wanted to make amends, but now you've been cold. So why? Naruto said, his voice laced with pure curiosity. His words froze Narumi for a moment. She stayed in place, making sure her eyes never left Naruto. She fought back the overwhelming amount of guilt and forced it back down into the depths of her mind, ignoring the way his words had torn at her heart. Shaking her head at Naruto, she started a slow walk towards her brother. She watched as his eyes remained locked onto her. As she got closer, she grabbed her poncho, forcing it over her head and throwing it into the sky, letting the breeze consume it. Naruto remained impassive as he watched her walk closer to him. She let a look of disinterest seep into her face before she threw a cocky smirk towards Naruto, as she zipped up her chunin vest. Just like you told me before, it doesn't make a difference. His stoic expression did not falter as Narumi stopped in front of him. I think my question would be, do you have to betray the village, our very own family, to get what you want? Naruto scowled at her words, his eyes flashing dangerously as he flared his chakra intensely. He sent a punch to her face, letting her question go unanswered as she smirked at him again, bringing her forearm up, blocking the punch. Without hesitating, Naruto sent another punch her way, sticking to the same side so she couldn't block using her other arm. Narumi moved faster, however, as she brought her elbow down, her arm twisting and above his own, sent a punch to his face. Naruto ducked, flipping a kunai upwards and slashing towards Narumi. She reacted fast enough, flipping a kunai from her porch, intercepting his head-on. Narumi scowled at her brother, both putting an equal amount of force respectively behind their blade. How rude of you, to not even answer your dear sister's question, she growled out as she applied more pressure to her blade. Naruto groaned in dismay, trying his best to overpower Narumi. Sadly for him, his sister managed to match his power perfectly. Naruto grunted loudly as he felt his feet sink further into the snow. Narumi quickly overpowered him, forcing Naruto to break his grip on his kunai as he fell to the floor. Performing a quick shunshin appearing to Narumi's left, Narumi, who had anticipated this, quickly turned, sending her knee directly into his gut. Naruto gasped in pain and he didn't have time to react as Narumi bent her body and put her hand on the ground, twisting her legs and kicking Naruto in the face, sending him to the ground. He winced in pain as he held himself up from the ground, panting heavily. I told you, Naruto ni. You aren't betraying us, she said, looking down on him with an odd sense of relief and pity. Naruto chuckled quietly to himself, his chuckle soon evolved into loud laughter. Narumi looked at him with a small amount of shock, allowing him to get to his feet. Time seemed to slow down for Narumi as she watched Naruto slowly look over at her, her eyes going wide with shock as she looked into his new golden right eye. Her stomach dropped several stories in her chest as her head throbbed painfully. The demon inside of her slammed his large body against his cage. The fox was screaming, flailing his large 9 tails crazily. That's Isabu. What the fuck is he doing in there? Narumi didn't have time to ask the fox what he was talking about as Naruto sent a smirk her way. His laughter died as he looked at the shocked expression on Narumi's face. He could slowly feel Isabu's effect start to take over as he brought his free hand out, letting it hover over the white substance. Don't act so cocky, Narumi. After all, we're in the perfect area to fight in. Well, at least for me, he said, his golden eye glowing as he formed a single hand seal with his free hand. Water style, water dragon jutsu. The snow next to him looked like it suddenly evaporated, sucking the moisture out of the snow as 3 large water dragons formed next to the blonde. Naruto swung his arm forward, commanding the beasts of water and sent them flying over to Narumi. Narumi felt her eyes widen slightly once again, not having enough time to dwell on what the Kyuubi said within her. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the dragons as they crashed into the snow-covered floor, exploding on impact and sending a giant plum of water into the field, obscuring Narumi's vision. Narumi's ears twitched, hearing a sudden splash to her left. Narumi turned her body, waiting to counterattack only to see a kunai soar past her, not seeing Naruto jump through the water, sending a punch to her face from her opposing side. He made contact with her face, making Narumi's head fly back. She reacted almost instantly, her head snapping back right away, forcing through the pain, and quickly placed her palm on Naruto's chest. Naruto experienced the same jutsu she had used in the hotel. He felt his body get blown backwards from the incredible gust of wind as he landed on his feet, barely having time to see Narumi fly through hand seals. Wind style, great breakthrough. Naruto watched the blades of wind fly towards him. He did his own set of seals before slamming his palms into the freezing snow. Water style, water wall jutsu. The water got sucked out of the snow once again as a large wall made of pure water formed from the ground, shielding him from the wind attack. Sadly, his defensive jutsu didn't seem to be strong enough as the wind cut right through the water wall and struck Naruto directly in the chest. Naruto's body erupted in pain as he was sent flying back, bouncing on the ground several times. He didn't have time to react as Narumi sent a swift kick into his stomach. Naruto yelped in pain as he felt his body slide backwards again, this time stopping as a clone of Narumi caught him, forcing him into a chokehold. Narumi looked over at her brother, her face scrunching in annoyance as she formed a single-handed seal again. Kai! She yelled as the scene in front of her suddenly vanished without a trace. She turned around to see a heavy-breathing Naruto, his arm wrapped around his stomach. She traced her eyes down to his stomach, feeling a weird emotion as she saw blood leak from his wound. Give it up, Naruto ni, you can't keep up with me. I'll admit you are strong, but you're nowhere near my level. Naruto cringed at her harsh tone, clenching his fists in anger as his golden eye seemed to burn brighter. He ignored the screaming words of Isabu in the back of his head, telling Naruto to calm down and take it easy, to not let the anger overtake him once again. Telling him that Narumi should have been told by Kyuubi that he was carrying the Sanbi. He didn't find it in himself to care at the moment, pushing the demon's words away as he shut his left eye. His face conforming into a deep scowl. Fine, you want to fight. You got one, he yelled, opening his left eye. Narumi felt her blood run cold as Naruto charged at her. She could barely comprehend if what she was seeing was real or not. Too shocked to react, she didn't have enough time to block the fist Naruto had sent her way. It impacted against her cheek and sent her falling to the ground. Before she had even realized what was happening, Naruto sent a downward fist plummeting her into the ground. Her back made a small crater in the floor. She spat up some blood and wheezed loudly. Narumi recovered quickly, kicking Naruto in the gut and sending him back once again. She got to her feet as the two stared into each other's eyes, a silent exchange validating what they knew about one another. Narumi had known Naruto had grown stronger, stronger than almost any genin that had graduated this year, but this was unexpected. She didn't have enough time to dwell in shock, seeing her brother's mixed gold eye, and the spinning Sharingan as it glared over at her. She knew he was hiding something from her, but she didn't know it would be a tailed beast, and a dojutsu. She would get the answers out of him, even if it meant breaking every bone in his body and dragging him back to Konoha. But one thing was certain as the two Namikaze children looked at one another, it was a conclusion that Narumi feared even through her tough exterior, and one that Naruto had known. She was not his sister. And he was not her brother. Narumi chased, continuing the exchange with a swift swipe of a kunai to the blonde's side. Naruto brought his own kunai out, blocking the swipe easily as he brought his shoulder forward, driving it into Narumi's ribcage. The redhead grabbed his wrist in an attempt to throw him away, creating a large space that was just enough slice at Naruto's coat, forcing him to retreat. In an instant they were back on the attack. Naruto channeled his water chakra into his hands, sucking up the moisture from the snow once again as a blade of pure water formed in his hand, attempting to strike at Narumi. However, Narumi was prepared this time and channeled wind chakra into her kunai. The second the blades made contact, Narumi's ripped through the water weapon, swiping his chest. Naruto, having seen his jutsu get destroyed, forcefully dispelled the technique, splashing upwards and obscuring Narumi's vision once again. Narumi scowled, the sudden disorientation leaving her unbalanced, letting Naruto slip away and send a brutal kick to the redhead's inner thigh, before ending it with a swift punch in the stomach. The female Namikaze reeled back in pain as she glared at Naruto. She swore she heard a loud crack as she skidded back. Wind style, wind dragon jutsu, shouted Narumi, using the distance to craft her jutsu before the giant 20-foot-long dragon made of pure wind formed behind her, depositing a large portion of her chakra into it as she sent the roaring mythical beast towards her brother. She felt her eyes narrow as an identical beast impacted with hers. Naruto, having copied her jutsu with his Sharingan. His jutsu seemed to lack in power as Narumi's dragon soared directly, though, losing about 10 feet of distance as a large gust picked up from the destruction. Naruto shunshined out of the way just in time, appearing above Narumi as she rolled to the right, just barely dodging the downward strike. Naruto felt his breathing start to get heavy as a small amount of panic set in. He had easily expelled more chakra than he was originally anticipating. He had been pumping each jutsu with all the chakra he could muster, and it seemed that it didn't really affect Narumi, as she barely looked like she had a scratch on her and she wasn't even sweating. Even now that he was able to keep up with her because of his Sharingan, he still couldn't match her speed or power. He couldn't use Isabu's chakra either. He had not trained in using it yet and feared if he did he would lose control, and that he just couldn't afford to do. Even his Shunshin couldn't catch her by surprise. She just took all his hits and shook him off, like it didn't even faze her. He clenched his eyes shut and bit his lip, trying his best to think of a way out of this situation. Narumi was strong, stronger than he had thought she would be. Her presence alone was much more strong than soccer, and the intensity rolling off of her was almost suffocating. Damn it, why can't you guys just leave me alone? I'm sick and tired of it all. He screamed, his golden eye fading away, letting his normal blue become visible. He looked over at Narumi again, this time letting confusion overtake him. Narumi sighed sadly as she forced her eyes away from the blonde, a look of pity flashing across her eyes. That didn't sit right with Naruto. She spoke, each word felt like a dagger forcefully ripping at his heart. To answer your question earlier, I was jealous of you, she said, making Naruto's eyes go wide. I felt like I had worked so hard, trained every day to get to where I am now. Then you came along, a new academy graduate who managed to kill a Junin-level shinobi on his very first mission, something even I haven't had the pleasure of doing. I had thought you were stronger than us, stronger than me. That's why I wanted you to prove yourself to me. I needed to see how someone with no real training made it so far, she said, her eyes flashing again with guilt at her words. She didn't notice the look that had crossed over Naruto's face, because if she did, she would have stopped talking immediately. I guess I was wrong, you aren't stronger than us, you don't even compare. But I want to change that. I want to bring you back home and finally get the training you deserve. We can be a family again, Nichan, she said, finally looking back at Naruto with a smile on her face. Huh, be a family again. Training I deserve, Naruto said softly, getting to his feet as he looked back at Narumi. Her smile dropped from her face instantly as Naruto sent her the darkest look she had even seen. Her breath hitched in her throat as she watched him reach behind his head and untie the headband around his forehead. Naruto had to stop himself from trembling in anger at Narumi. Not only did she disrespect his strength, she once again treated him like he was weak, like he was nothing without his family. Naruto felt pure animosity burn in his body as the wounds on his stomach instantly healed. He flipped a kunai out from his pouch and snarled at Narumi. I don't need your pity, I don't need your help. I had the perfect sensei anyone could have asked for. Shisui Nisan was the only family I needed. You guys, he stated, swiping the kunai over his Konoha headband, putting a perfect vertical slash over the village symbol. Narumi had to fight back a gasp as she watching as Naruto tied the headband back over his forehead. A nothing but strangers to me. He finished darkly, his Sharingan changing shape and taking the form of stretched out windmill shuriken. Naruto didn't give a moment to spare as he charged, his speed much faster than before as he continued to swing his kunai. Narumi blocked the vertical swipe with her own blade, this time sneering at the pressure her brother was putting behind it. She watched as he spun around her, launching towards her again as he formed a single-handed seal. Blood style, red missile. He said, making Narumi's eyes bug out of her skull as the blood from his torso suddenly formed a small-looking spear and took off in her direction. She tilted her head, barely avoiding the attack as Naruto shunshined away. She felt his kunai swipe against her left side, and she winced in pain. Turning to her left, forcing Naruto's assault to stop as he sent an identical blood jutsu her way, rolling away from the attack. She didn't have time to see Naruto hot on her trail, his new Sharingan boring into her. Narumi screamed in annoyance, using all the strength she could muster, watched as he descended upon her with his kunai in hand as it pierced through her shoulder. Blood leaked from what wound, but she didn't care. She didn't react to the pain as she reached up and gripped Naruto at the wrist. Naruto felt his bones start to crack from the amount of pressure Narumi was gripping with. Narumi snarled angrily, her own eyes turning red as a dark red chakra cloak started to bubble around her. Her Kyuubi cloak came to life as two identical chakra tails swung behind her. Naruto gasped as he watched his sister two tails wrap themselves around his dangling legs. They gripped on tight and swung Naruto over her head, crashing him down into the ground below. Narumi grinned, flashing her enlarged canines as Naruto winced from the excruciating pain. He looked down at his wrist, no doubt it was broken. Naruto leapt backwards, forming a water whip jutsu that wrapped itself around Narumi's wrist. He attempted to pull her closer to her but failed to realize that once it made contact with her chakra cloak, the water had already turned to steam from the Kyuubi's chakra. Narumi just grinned again, sending her clawed hand out as it extended several feet trying to grab hold of Naruto. Thanks to his Sharingan he was able to dodge the first swing, but he jumped right into the hand of the second. He felt the claws puncture his skin as he yelled in pain. Narumi didn't stop her attack as she jumped at the captive blonde, sending a punch to Naruto's skull. Naruto spat out blood as he felt his body fly out and land painfully on his back. He wheezed loudly as he felt his arms get pinned above his head, forcing his eyes to look up to see the intimidating form of Narumi as she sat on his bleeding torso. Her tails holding his legs down while her hands held his arms. Naruto could barely keep his Sharingan open as the pain in his head was almost unbearable. Narumi lost her grin as she looked down at Naruto, pity etched into her face. She hated the fact that she had to use the Kyuubi's chakra. But he needed to learn his lesson, to know when he's losing a fight he cannot win. Give up, Ni-chan, let's go home, together. Naruto glared with all the strength he had left. He still had chakra in his system, he would still win, he had to. Narumi was too engrossed with her supposed victory to see both of Naruto's hands form a small seal. Blood style, red spiral. Narumi felt her eyes go wide as a medium-sized spiral blade formed on the blonde's chest. Narumi was forced to let go of the blonde and jump away. She didn't have time to avoid the attack as the blood blade pierced through her cloak and into her shoulder once again. She yelled in pain as her right arm went limp besides her. She growled in pain as Naruto got to his feet. She reached up, forcing the jutsu out of her shoulder as a large amount of blood spilled out of her wound. Naruto reached for the kunai that had fell from his hand. His breathing was erratic as the Kyuubi cloak around Narumi slowly seeped back into her, no doubt getting to work to try and fix her now broken arm. Naruto channeled all the chakra he had left. He had every intention to end this fight here and now. Isabu had seemingly gone quiet after he forcefully took his chakra back, trying his best to not make Naruto lose control. Naruto stared intently at Narumi, and she returned his gaze with just as much vigor. Naruto slowed his breathing down, forcing his body to become calm as a large trail of blood started to leak its way down his left eye. Infusing his chakra into the kunai, he sent the blade flying towards Narumi. Narumi scowled as she watched the kwani get closer to her. The throw was pathetic. She had seen better academy students throw kunai with more precision than this. The kunai was about 6 feet from her, flying past her at an incredible speed. She almost wanted to laugh at the throw. TCH, how pathetic, she thought to herself, grinning as she tried to tear her eyes off the kunai and back at Naruto. That's when she realized she couldn't. Narumi felt a sudden sense of unease wash over her body, her eyes growing wide as they stayed locked into the flying weapon. No matter what, she just couldn't force her eyes away. Why am I still looking at the kunai? She thought anxiously, not believing what was happening, and didn't have time to move as a sharp chakra-enhanced punch impacted her chin. She felt her teeth clamp together in pain, almost biting a portion of her tongue off as she was sent flying into the air, a huffing Naruto standing where she once was with his feet raised in the air. Narumi came crashing down onto her broken arm and cried out in pain once she made contact with the ground. She felt tears form in her eyes as she looked up, her vision blurry, but she could make out the wavering body of her brother standing over her. Blood leaking from his now closed left eye, as he looked down at her. She couldn't move her body. The Kyuubi's chakra was doing everything it could to heal her broken arm, and it left her other injured vulnerable since she had already lost a lot of blood. She felt her vision start to become hazy from the blood loss. Naruto Nichan, please don't leave, WW can F fix T this. Narumi whimpered, tears spilling from her blue eyes as she watched her brother, the very same brother she had just called weak not too long ago, standing over her victoriously. Somewhere in her head she knows she deserved this, that they all did. They didn't deserve his kindness, his loyalty, his love. She knew that, but she still fought to keep him here, in a place she knew he didn't want to be in, because they forced him away. She didn't fight back, the tears falling down her cheeks as she tried to recognize his face, trying her best to see the brother she thought she had. He was nowhere to be found. Naruto closed his remaining eye shut. All anger from his body had vanished as he looked down at the broken form of Narumi. He watched her face go pale from the blood loss, and he tried for a moment to find just a sliver of remorse in him. It was nowhere to be found. Like I said before, Narumi, we're nothing but strangers, he said softly, making Narumi shut her eyes in pain. She gave a curt nod of understanding before she laid her head back down on the floor as she finally fell unconscious. Naruto stayed in his spot, looking at the broken state of his sister with no emotion. He couldn't believe he had done it. Narumi was strong. If Naruto didn't have any of his abilities, he would have for sure lost that fight. He hated to admit it, but he knew she was stronger, but once again he had just gotten lucky. Regardless, I'm proud of you. Naruto managed a small smile and sent an invisible nod of appreciation towards the Bayou. He let himself have a moment to himself, letting out a sigh of relief as he held his broken wrist, trying his best to not wince from the pain. Naruto-kun. Naruto felt his body freeze up again, the familiar voice reaching his ears. He didn't want to turn around. He didn't know if he could even look her in the eye. Thankfully he didn't have to, as he felt the familiar body press up against him and give him a tight back hug. Kurenai fell to her knees to give the boy a hug. He could feel the soft drips of tears as they flowed out of her eyes and landed on his hair. I was so worried. I felt that awful Kyuubi chakra and I couldn't find you anywhere, she said, her voice muffled as she spoke into his hair. Naruto felt his heart flutter once again as she spoke, but the feeling was soon plagued by guilt as he clenched his fists. He almost wished his adrenaline rush would die down so he could pass out from exhaustion. He felt his own tears form in his eyes as he turned slowly to look at Kurenai, her big red eyes laced with worry as she held him tight. For a moment Naruto had almost forgotten that he had agreed to betray Konoha, that he was forced to in order to keep Kurenai safe. He felt his resolve start to waver as Kurenai's grip tightened around him. I'm alright, Kurenai-chan. His voice squealed slightly as he said her name, guilt rising in him as he shakily grabbed Kurenai's hands and pushed them off his body. Kurenai looked stunned for a moment before Naruto turned around fully to face her. Kurenai had to fight back a gasp as her eyes looked at his disheveled appearance. His shirt was almost completely drenched in blood and his hair was damp, falling into his eyes more so than it already did. But what caught her attention was the crossed-out Konoha headband around his forehead. Kurenai-sensei. Who's the boy? Naruto and Kurenai jumped in surprise at the voice. Naruto looked at the tall man running to them in confusion. Kurenai didn't take her eyes off of Naruto as she waved her hand dismissively. He's with us, don't worry Kagami-kun, she answered the tall man, never breaking her stare with Naruto. Naruto quickly shunned the guy as he looked at Kurenai. She reached out and softly cupped his cheek again, gliding her thumb over his scar, not caring that his cheek was stained in blood. Naruto felt a sob escape his throat as he lunged at Kurenai, his arms wrapping around her. Kurenai didn't hesitate to return the hug. Kurenai-chan, I'm so sorry, he whispered into her neck, his voice sounding broken as she rubbed his back softly. It was then that she noticed the bloody and unconscious body of Narumi Namikaze laying on the ground. She masked her shock, she somehow feared this would have happened. She raised her hand and ran her hands through his blonde hair. For what, Naruto-kun? This, he said as he removed his head from her neck. She was about to ask her question again as she looked over only to see his Sharingan eye spinning widely in his socket. She felt her body grow cold as an unknown feeling flowed through her bones. Her eyes started to feel heavy as she felt her arms fall limp at her side. She tried to keep her eyes open, only to see the tear-stricken face of Naruto looking at her. Naru, too. She managed to get out before she fell completely limp in his arms. He fought back his tears of betrayal as he grabbed her head before it could hit the floor. He gently laid her down on the soft snow, letting his gaze linger on her shocked unconscious expression for just a moment longer. Knowing that this is one of the last times he would see her, in a very, very long time. Hey, what did you do to Kurenai-sensei? Naruto wiped his eyes with his arms, abolishing any evidence of crying as he turned and glared at the man, his Sharingan eye staring deeply into the man's eyes making him cower in fear. Take care of these two, Kurenai-chan seems to trust you so I will. Make sure nothing bad happens to them, understand? Kagami nodded rapidly as he took a step away from the blonde. He couldn't look away, he felt like he was being forced to look into the boy's Sharingan. Good, and the second I leave, you will forget that you saw my Sharingan, understood? Naruto said, his eye spinning widely again as the genjutsu just took effect on the man. Kagami felt his eyes glaze over as he nodded robotically, his face going void of any emotion. Understood. Hermai wondered if he died out there. The masked man mumbled to himself as he rubbed his chin in thought. It had been a little over an hour since he had left Naruto and came to the entrance of Roka with keys. If the blonde boy had indeed died, then this mission would have just a whole big bust, and would cause a lot more complication from his group than he would like to think of. Sighing again, he ran a hand through his silver hair. He was thinking of removing his mask since it was just the two of them here. He hated wearing it, it was super uncomfortable and it hid his beautiful face from the world. I mean, how would his leader know if he had taken it off anyway? Anno, masked man-san. The masked man looked down and smiled at the timid young girl at his feet. He offered a huge smile, which went unnoticed because of his mask, and patted the girl on the head. Yes, what is it, Keys-chan? Well, why haven't we left yet? We've been here for so long, she said with a pout, and the masked man couldn't help but laugh as she looked at him, her big gold eyes shining with confusion as she held the poncho over her little body closer to her. Keys-chan, remember, we have to wait for Naruto-kun, he said, and immediately after he spoke he felt his ears twitch. He grinned under his mask as he motioned Keys to look out to the village entrance. She did so with a little hesitancy, and both the masked man and Keys widened their eyes at what they saw. Keys quickly hurried behind the tall man's legs in fear as the masked man felt his mouth fall open in shock. Naruto-kun, you look like shit. Naruto didn't even bother to respond as he just rolled his eyes, glaring at the masked man, wishing his glare would reduce the man to ash. The masked man's eyes seemed to light up in glee as he noticed the scratched-out headband. He clapped his hands in approval as he motioned Keys forward. Naruto looked down as the girl stepped forward. She looked pretty timid as she avoided eye contact with Naruto. She slowly took her place beside the blonde as the masked man offered Naruto a large storage scroll. Naruto raised an eyebrow and looked up at the man in confusion. It's just some supplies for you both. There's tents, food, training supplies and... He stopped, looking Naruto up and down again. Clothes for you both. He finished as Naruto rolled his eyes again. He mumbled a quiet thanks before looking down at the girl next to him. He didn't know how to even talk to her. Hell, he hasn't talked to a child since he was 1. Are you ready, Keys-san? The girl nodded, shrinking back into her poncho timidly. The masked man gave a hearty laugh as he ruffled both of the kids' hair. Keys let it happen, but Naruto was quick to smack his hand away. Well, good luck you two, have a safe trip. Before either of them he vanished into thin air. Keys jumped in surprise at the technique. Naruto suppressed a groan as he looked back to Roka Town. His eyes softened as he did so, his mind flashing images of Kurenai as he felt sadness flow through him. At least I know you're safe, Kurenai-chan. He took a few heavy steps away from the gate, motioning Keys to follow him. Come on, let's go, he said bitterly, making the young girl jump again. She moved her little legs quickly, trying to catch up to the blonde boy. They stayed in silence as they walked through the freezing Yukigakure air. Neither of them knew what to expect from this trip, each step held more weight as they walked. But they knew it wouldn't be easy, both were entering unknown territory for the first time. And they were completely alone. Day of the full moon. Kurenai was running, her legs sprinting as fast as they could as she chased after a darkened silhouette. Darkness surrounded her, almost engulfing her entire body as she ran forward. Periodically she would reach out to the figure she was trailing. Anytime she would get close, her hand would phase right through it, like it was a mirage. But then it would get faster, its footsteps echoing in the abyss as she forced her legs to keep up with the apparition. She didn't know why she was chasing it, or who it was. But she knew she had to. Something about its alluring presence had struck a chord within the red-eyed beauty, and she refused to let it leave her sight, in fear of it vanishing completely. She didn't know how far she ran, or where exactly she was running to. The only thing that plagued her mind was the figure. She wanted to grab hold of it. Hold it close to her. She wanted to run her hands through the blackened out spiky hair as she held it tight. Making sure it knew that it wasn't alone, that Kurenai would be there for it, forever. These thoughts had manifested long ago, before she was even aware that these feelings were dormant in her. The figure's face remained a mystery still, shielding her from the impossible truth that she didn't know she could believe, that she didn't know she should believe. She ignored the heavy sweat beading down her brow as she called out to the figure, her voice desperate for it to stop, desperate for just a single moment of clarity. Panic had started to set in her body as she watched the black figure grow further away from her, its body almost indistinguishable as it blended in with the darkened void of nothingness. She called out again, her voice hoarse, begging the figure to wait for her. Tears erupted in her eyes as her arm reached out in hopelessness, agony pumping in her veins as she cried out. Suddenly Kurenai watched as the figure stopped its run, turning around as two deep cerulean eyes looked back at her, torment etched into those beautiful blue irises as tears streamed down the desolate face. Kurenai felt her heart dance in her chest, like a loud drum banging in her ribcage as her own tears cascaded down her cheeks. The closer she got, more of the previous vacant face she could see, every little detail sent tremors up her spine. She forced her voice to speak, her voice laced with unsung desire as a certain name ripped itself free from her throat. Naruto-kun. Kurenai yelled as she gasped for air, her body springing up from her bed as she huffed loudly. She instinctively raised her hand to her face, the palms of her hands shielding her face, trying to get her surprisingly heavy breathing under control. Her mind slowly piecing together all her thoughts. From Narumi's unconscious body, Naruto's scratched headband, and his spinning Sharingan as he looked at her. She felt her hands get wet as tears leaked from her red eyes as she forced them shut. She knew what it had meant, but she didn't want to believe it. She would have never thought Naruto would ever do something like this. It hurt, her heart felt like it was on fire, burning her very skin to charcoal. She wanted to run after him, yell at him for doing this. She was angry. She felt betrayed. I'm glad to see that you're finally awake. Kurenai snapped her head over as she heard a voice speak to her. Looking over, she laid her eyes upon the heavily bandaged Namikaze. She was sitting on the edge of a window, using her knee to hold her head up as she stared out the bedroom window, looking up at the darkening sky above their heads. Narumi didn't turn to look at her, she instead continued to look outwards as she spoke. Kurenai stared at the redhead with a critical eye, her ruby orbs narrowing ever so slightly at the girl. She couldn't help but notice the weak look in her pensive stare, one she had never seen before the longer she stared at the heiress. Her lips were pursed in a thin line, even her voice seemed to lack the vigor that it once held. Narumi ignored the Junin's lingering gaze on her, leaning her head against the closed window with her eyes shut. You've been out for about 10 days, we were beginning to get worried. Kurenai blinked in surprise at her words, tearing her eyes off of Narumi and looking down at the blanket over her. She clenched her hands around the fabric. Regardless, do you know why Naruto-kun did this? Kurenai asked, cutting to the chase as she kept her vision locked onto her hands. A tense silence rolled into the room and Kurenai found herself getting irritated at the girl's secrecy. I think you know exactly what happened. Don't beat around the bush here. Kurenai yelled, snapping her head back over to Narumi's direction. Kurenai scowled, finding herself growing more and more irritated at the girl's withdrawn attitude. Narumi covered up her frown with her arm, refusing to look in Kurenai's direction. Narumi gave a slow nod of her head, wishing she could be anywhere else but here. Yes. Then, care to explain? Kurenai said irritably, digging her nails into the soft fabric beneath her fingers. Narumi sighed deeply. She was in no mood to talk about what happened. It was still very much fresh on her mind and wanted to avoid the topic at all costs. Or at least wait until they get back to Konoha. Narumi turned her body towards Kurenai, and it was the first time the black-headed beauty noticed the cast over Narumi's arm. When I found him, he was talking to a masked man, who I assume was their leader. I didn't hear the whole thing, just bits and pieces, but he said something about delivering someone named Keys in exchange for information, but he would have to become a missing nin. Narumi looked down, still refusing to look into Kurenai's eyes. The red eyes Junin felt her eyes sting. She just couldn't get the crying image of Naruto out of her face as he put her under with his dojutsu. It was haunting, something she wasn't sure she would ever forget. He said if Naruto refused, he would reveal all of his secrets, and Kurenai felt her body tense as the word secrets left Narumi's mouth. She quickly masked her expression, thankful Narumi didn't seem to notice or mention it. There was a brief pause before Narumi continued. The redhead finally looked over at her. Her blue eyes flashing with an unknown emotion as the two stared at one another. Narumi's voice wavered as she spoke, her lips were chapped, her face still pale from her injuries. Kurenai slightly wondered if the QB inside of her was even healing her wounds. He said if Naruto didn't go, then you would have been killed. Kurenai's breath hitched as the words left the scarred lips of Narumi. She felt her blood run cold as the words marinated in her thoughts. Naruto abandoned the village, left everything behind, for her sake. She felt the foreign feeling invade her chest again like it had in her dream, but this time it was much more prominent. The feelings struck at every vein in her body, forcing her to physically wince at the feeling. She fought back the uncontrollable anguish stinging in her eyes as she sat hunched over in her bed. Narumi watched the Junin for a few moments before hopping off the windowsill and making her way to the front door. She silently grabbed the door handle before taking a single glance back at Kurenai. Her eyes remained emotionless, but there was a small spark of sadness reflecting in her orbs. It was obvious she was hurting, and she didn't know what Naruto and Kurenai's relationship was. She knew Naruto held Kurenai on a special pedestal than most people. She had overheard many conversations the two of them had during their trip, and even when she was working alongside Team 11. But watching the Junin shake slightly in her bed, she couldn't help but pity Kurenai slightly. Narumi held a great amount of empathy towards Kurenai at this moment. The redhead was still in fact blaming Naruto's defection on their own family. They refused to love him, they refused a family with Naruto. But watching Kurenai, who was more heartbroken at Naruto's defection than herself, it was yet another reminder that she never had Naruto as a brother. I'm going to check with Kagami-san to see if he needs help with anything. I'll just leave you alone for a bit. Narumi spoke softly, her eyes now shining with unconditional sadness as she left the room, the door slightly echoing in the quiet room as Narumi walked away. The soft tone of her voice did nothing to comfort Kurenai as she trembled in bed, leaving the Junin in a defeated state. I'm sorry. Naruto and Keys walked side by side as they passed through the evergreen forest of Takagakure. Once the two of them finally left Roka town, the boatman was kind enough to take them closer to Lightning Country and dropped them off at a port just a few days out from the waterfall village. They had little to no trouble passing into the border of Taki. Naruto had used a genjutsu to cover up his slashed-out headband so people wouldn't get suspicious of him. It seemed to work better than he was hoping it would. Naruto figured that Narumi and Kurenai hadn't made it back to Konoha, so his status as a missing nin wasn't official, so it gave him and his young companion an easier and more relaxed travel through Taki. The two companies hadn't spoken much during their travels through the small country. Naruto could tell she didn't trust him. After all, he was a complete stranger to the girl. Keys jumped in fear whenever there was a semi-loud noise off in the distance and would blindly look down and cower behind the blonde. He slightly wondered what had happened to Keys for her to be so jumpy. The mystery was still at large since Naruto by any means didn't feel like asking. They were both keeping each other at a distance. When she was scared she would hide behind Naruto, but other than that they were always a good distance away from one another, basking in the uncomfortable awkward silence. She listened to his instructions well and was a big help for setting up camp. She would listen without barking back and was always quick to finish her job, something Naruto actually was impressed at. Again, his mind wandered on why such a young girl was so good at setting up camp. The trek through Takagakure lasted only about 4 days. They took no time to marvel at the country's beautiful and exotic waterfalls, and they just coasted right by, much to Kiss's dismay. Luckily they didn't find any trouble on their journey. Most people who say stumbled across didn't even spare them a second glance. Taki was more peaceful than he thought. They didn't run into a single shinobi or bandit once. The journey was slow, much slower than Naruto had originally expected it to be. When he thought about it, he should have known better. Keys certainly didn't have the stamina for faster travel, and her little legs could only go so far before she collapsed. He would most of their time carry her piggyback style on his back during the night, since she would always be exhausted before the sun would even set. Looking down at his map, Naruto couldn't help but frown. They had just passed the border into Sound Country, and traveling at the current pace it would most likely take anywhere up from a month to finally enter Lightning Country. The pace was too slow for comfort, but he knew pushing Keys too far would most likely backfire on him almost instantly, and that he just couldn't afford. He didn't so much care for the girl, but she was his mission, and the mission had to be completed no matter what. Naruto went to run his hand through his hair and winced at the sudden pain, momentarily forgetting the wrist that Narumi had broken. He looked at the makeshift cast around his wrist and sighed. He tried his best to stop his mind from drifting back to his abandoned teammates, especially one in particular. He felt especially guilty since he would have to live with Team 11 thinking he abandoned them, just as they were starting to become really close as a team. Naruto then groaned, looking down his arm again, annoyed slightly that his blood jutsu couldn't heal broken bones. His wrist hurt like hell. Naruto turned to Keys, telling the girl that they would be stopping for the night and to start setting up camp. Naruto didn't know anything about Sound Country, and he would rather be safe than sorry than traveling during the night. Keys nodded and took off her large backpack and quietly took out 2 tents and got to work assembling them. Naruto, happy to see her get to work, was quick to put together a fireplace and take out the food that the masked man was generous enough to give them. Luckily they were kept in a separate preservation scroll, so he didn't have to worry about it spoiling any time soon, and it would probably last them all the way until Lightning Country. Anno. Naruto-san. What is it? Naruto replied as he started cooking several meat skewers for the two of them over the now burning fire. He didn't look at Keys as she spoke. Instead he focused on not burning the meat as Keys took a seat on the grass across from him. She brought her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them protectively, her golden eyes looking at Naruto awkwardly. After a moment of silence, Naruto finally raised his head to meet the now shy golden eyes looking back at him. He raised an eyebrow and stayed silent. If she wanted to speak then she would, he wouldn't force her. Keys fidgeted in her seated position before looking away from Naruto, her lips quivering slightly in shyness. Well, I wanted to ask you, why did you agree to take me? Naruto lowered his brow at the unexpected question. He pursed his lips into a thin line as he used his non-bandaged hand to scratch the back on his head. Well, I guess because the masked man forced me to. We kinda have a deal that after I deliver you I will finally be told who killed my sensei. Forced you to. Yeah. He said if I didn't then he would kill my closest person. Oh, sorry. Naruto felt something in his chest clench at the girl's sudden broken tone of voice. She pulled her legs even closer to her and buried her head within them, hiding her face from view. Naruto felt an increase of awkwardness as she did so. Confusion flashed in his eyes as he took the meat skewers off the fire and placed them on a small plate. Why are you sorry? Naruto felt his heart twinge again as he heard a sob scrape by her throat. The tiny girl shook her head at Naruto, refusing to look up as she spoke into her arms, her voice heavily muffled. I'm tired of people dying because of me, they always die and leave me alone. Naruto felt his heart drop in his chest, he barely heard what she said since it was so muffled. While Naruto had no idea what she was talking about, it now made a little more sense why the girl was so distraught all the time. He wouldn't pry her to talk about it, he knew better than a lot of people that it's hard to open up to people. And Keys was definitely scared, he didn't know how deep, but it was deep enough for such a young child. For a split second he saw himself in her shoes and he had to fight back a gasp. Was this what would have happened if he never met Shisui? Shaking his head not wanting to think about that, he slowly got up from his previous position and knelt down to the girl. He placed a hesitant hand on her shoulder, she flinched slightly at his touch. Her eyes widened in horror as she snapped her head up to look at Naruto. Naruto tried his best to put on the softest look he could muster up. He didn't want a repeat of what happened back in Roka. After Keys didn't force his hand away, and thankfully no puppets chasing after him. He patted her shoulder awkwardly, a small smile forming on his lips. Hey, don't be sorry. I needed to get away from my village anyway. I was starting to feel like I was suffocating, so I think this is a good thing. And I mean, no one's dying on you now. He replied, he himself wasn't very confident in his answer but it seemed to drastically raise Kiss's mood. Her eyes widened, and tears finally stopped forming within her irises. Her face physically brightened, it still lacked the mirth that a young child should have. But it was a big improvement from the whole journey so far. She offered back a small awkward smile in return and nodded her head. Naruto felt a weird warm sensation crawl over his cold bones as he looked at the now smiling girl. He removed his hand from her shoulder and was about to offer her some food before a soft crack echoed in the distance. His ear twitched, noticing Keys also heard it. He watched as her eyes evolved back into fear. He quickly threw his hand over her mouth, shutting down a scream he knew that was coming. This action accidentally scared the young girl more as he held a finger to his lips. She seemed to take the hint and fearfully nodded her head. Naruto gave her a gracious nod of his own before shunching into the nearest tree that overlooked their campsite. He kept his hand over Kiss's mouth as he saw 3 unknown men jump into the clearing. He cursed at the angle he was looking at, he couldn't see if they had any shinobi headbands, most likely could be bandits. He frowned slightly as they mumbled to each other, a few laughs broke out between them as they picked up his meat skewers and started eating. Naruto had to suppress a groan at that. Naruto broke out of his thoughts as he felt Kiss's hand poked his arm. Looking back he was quick to apologize as he saw her still scared expression. He removed his hand from her mouth and she quietly breathed in the fresh air. Keys reverted back into herself as she looked down at the 3 unknown men below them. They were a good 30 feet away and had a perfect view from above. They seemed to not notice their presence at all, which gave Naruto enough time to hash out a plan. What are we going to do? Keys whispered to Naruto, her voice trembling slightly as she subconsciously moved closer to Naruto. Naruto, if he noticed, didn't mention it as he rubbed his chin in thought. From the looks of them they didn't look to be very strong, and they didn't seem to be alarmed that they entered someone else's freshly made camp. Hell, the food was still hot. Well, I could cast a genjutsu over them easily and we could probably sneak away without them even knowing. They don't look strong, so I would guess they're probably bandits. Naruto whispered back, his words slowly calming down Keys. What should I do? Naruto looked at Keys as she spoke. The young girl tried her best to suppress a gasp of surprise as he did so. The masked man did tell him that Kiss's magnet release was strong, and that she had loads of potential. It would be much easier if she was well trained to help them out in sticky situations, maybe even improve her stamina so they could travel at much faster speeds. He quickly looked back down at the 3 bandits, his eyes scanning over the area as they finally settled on the open bag directly behind 2 of the bandits. Naruto smirked as he placed his hand back on Kiss's shoulder. He ignored her sudden jump and pointed with his casted hand towards the small bag. Keys followed his finger and looked at the bag in confusion. This may be a good thing, maybe we can strengthen you up, he started as Keys blinked. In that bag are several kwani, can you use your magnet release on them? Keys' shoulders slumped down as she looked away. She shook her head, making Naruto look at her confused. He swore she should be able to do it. He saw her control puppets without chakra strings after all. Kise felt tears spring to her eyes once again. I don't know how. It kinda just happens, I can't control it. Kise muttered quietly, wrapping her arms around her waist. Naruto looked at the small girl with a soft glow of empathy, his mind flashing back to his first meeting with Shisui, the day before his birthday all those years ago. No one had bothered to teach him anything before that, no one gave him the chance to prove himself. The parallels between the two of them was starting to show more to the young blonde. Naruto wondered again, if this is what would have happened to him if he never met Shisui. Naruto's head flashed uncomfortable after those thoughts. Shaking away the negative thoughts, he slightly tapped Kise's shoulder. The younger girl looked up at Naruto's bright blue comforting eyes. He told her to copy his pose as he sat cross-legged on the thick tree branch. She followed suit with a moment's hesitation as he whispered to her. Try and let your chakra flow through your body at a comfortable pace. As of now, your emotions have been the trigger for your attacks, right? He said, and continued as Kise nodded and formed the ram seal with him. He smiled, almost forgetting that there were bandits currently looking through their belongings below them. Try and control the amount of chakra you are pushing through your coils, but don't force it through, that would only cause backlash. Kise slowly nodded as she turned back towards the open bag next to the bandits. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she kept her eyes locked onto the bag. She felt her chakra start to pulsate within her body and was scared that it might cause the backlash that Naruto was talking about. Naruto noticed her sudden change and softly whispered that she was doing a good job and to keep at it. Naruto's words seemed to help Kise as she let out a calming breath, letting her chakra flow to her hands at a calming pace. This was different than when she used the puppets to attack, or even on that fateful day. She winced at the thought, losing her concentration for a moment. Kise was thankful for Naruto's encouraging words as it kept her going for a moment longer. With one last chakra pulse, Naruto watched in awe as the kunai stored in her bag tore through the material and sent themselves soaring towards the three bandits. Naruto watched as the men below screamed in pain as dozens upon dozens of kunai ripped her bag clean open and embedded themselves in the poor bandits' bodies. Naruto felt a shudder down his spine as he looked back at Kise in shock and amazement. That masked man was right, this girl was incredibly dangerous. Naruto felt a tinge of pride well up inside of him. He didn't know if she would get what he was saying about her chakra, but she was glad to see that she soaked it up like a sponge. Kise looked at the scene below them and her eyes went wide with amazement. Her golden orbs sparkled serenely as she looked at Naruto with the biggest smile he had ever seen. The smile was definitely contagious as Naruto himself felt one form on his lips. I did it. I controlled them myself. Kise yelled happily as she bounded up and down in place. Her happy laughter echoed throughout the dark forest and Naruto shared her laughter with her. His eyes watched her as she channeled more chakra into her body. Slowly but surely the kunai flew back and forth, flying from tree to tree as she giggled relentlessly. Naruto marveled at the drastic change of her attitude. The feeling in his gut became more pure as she looked back at him with such happiness in her eyes, despite the fact that she had just killed 3 people. Naruto reached out and rubbed her hair. Kise didn't flinch this time as she just beamed at Naruto, a tinge of pink staining her cheeks from the excitement. And at this moment, Naruto truly realized what Shisui must have felt the first time they met all those years ago. The sudden awkwardness from their trip evaporated completely from the two of them, and a new bond was forming. One they both were unprepared for. This isn't so bad. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.